So we're going to walk through this example, and I will pull it up here just for a second. We are going to create a class called student record, and it's going to contain this following information. And we're going to have a bunch of member functions. In particular, there's going to be 1, 2, 3 set functions. There's going to be 1, 2, 3 get functions, and the seventh is going to be this recalculate the cumulative GPA based on the current semester GPA, and then of course additional hours. All right, well, let's get to work here. And we always have hash include statements at the very beginning. If you recall, I'm going to have an, well, let's do iostream, and we'll do using namespace standard, as you recall. And then we always have a main function right here. I'll do a return 0. Okay. And now we're to the point where we can start talking about what do we do if we want to make a new class, and in particular an instance of a class. And so if you recall, we have student record as our class type, and then I was saying that maybe we can have it called Billy. And let's say we want to have another student, okay, and we'll have a student record, and we'll call, I don't know, let's call Erica. So we have two students, and you'll notice that there is a little red squiggly because the identifier student record is undefined. All right, so this is why we need to have an include statement. And if you recall from the previous part of this lecture, we need to have an include statement that has, well, the class name. So the class name is, sure enough, student record. Then we have to have .h because it is a header file. All right, so what this means then is that we have a bunch of things defined inside this file right here so that we can use, well, student record. All right, well, we're now creating more red squigglies, so we have some other errors. And this is telling us that it can't open up this student record.h because it hasn't, well, even been created yet. So we're going to go over here, and to our source files, we're going to hit right click, we're going to hit add a new item, and now finally we can start to use, you've probably seen it throughout the semester, a header file. So I'm going to click on the .h file to include it inside all my source files. And you come in here and define student underscore record is, sure enough, this header file. I'll hit add, and now we can see that there are two files up here. You can see that there's this main, this example, okay? Then there's this student record right here. All right, it's got some defaults right here. We can perhaps ignore those. They might be within your IDE and they might not, but I'll just keep it right there. Okay, and so now we have a student record. Okay, I'm just going to Control S right here, and I'm going to come in here and hit Control S. Okay, and let's hope that as we update our student record, that this red squiggly will go away because it now will exist. Okay, well, let's go back to our slides here and just take a look at how do we define a class. Well, we have class and the class name. We have that those two things already. Then we've got a public and a private and some syntax here as well. So let's go off and do this. So we have class, then we have the class name, student underscore record, right? And then we have open parentheses, curly brackets that is. You'll notice then that we've already got the little semicolon at the bottom of it. Okay, and you can also notice that there's a slightly different shade right here, okay, indicating that student record is going to become, okay, the name of the class. Okay, not the instance or the object is going to be Billy and Erica, but the class name is student record. All right, we also have a private section, okay, and it ends with a semicolon, sorry, a colon, okay, and we also have a public section, so I'll come in here and do public and private. All right, now let's go back and talk a little bit about what we need to put in these public and private sections. Well, a lot of these things are of a private nature, and quite often the information that you want to keep secure is going to be found in the private section of classes. So we're first of all going to have variables, okay, and we'll have a float for our GPA. Okay, we'll set a little semicolon right there. Let's go back to our data. We've got total credit hours. Well, since we can have decimal values of credit hours, for example, 0.5, we're going to have a float as well. Okay, and we'll call it hours. I'm going to have everything be capitalized in my private variables space. And then we have a student ID. Okay, a student ID, assuming that it's all numeric, can get by with an integer. Okay, and I'll have it ID, right, like there. So this is all the information that we want to, of course, keep private inside our class definition, whether it's our declaration or implementation. And since this is a .h file, this would be called the class declaration file. All right, so we've got our private variables here. Now let's go back and take a look at our member functions. Well, we're going to have, as I said, 7. We're going to have 3 set functions. Okay, so we're going to come in here and we'll have a function called set GPA. Okay, I'll just put that for now because it's a function. We're going to have something called set hours. Okay, then we're going to have something called set ID. Okay, and of course there should be some red squigglies here and some tabbing that we can fix up in a little bit. Okay, so we've got some set functions right here. Okay, and now we need to do the get functions, and so we're actually just going to copy this over and set these last ones to get, and get ID. All right, and the last one is going to be recalculate. So I'll do recalc GPA as the function. All right, so by now you're probably saying, I know a little bit more about functions, and no, these don't look like anything like functions in C++. The main reason, of course, is that for every function in C++, you have to have, well, some sort of return type. Now, if I am setting the GPA, which means I'm going to come in here and update the GPA, okay, I don't necessarily need to get any return things because I'm doing a task, if you recall from the functions lecture many weeks ago. So usually set functions are going to be void in the sense that they're doing a task, they're just going to update this GPA. Let's talk about the arguments. Well, if I'm setting the GPA, I better have some sort of GPA right here. Okay, and so what I can do is have some sort of, well, GPA as a variable, but it has to be the correct type. So I need to have float GPA, and then, as you recall, when it's a function prototype, I need to have it ending with a semicolon. So then, this function right here, which has now got a little green squiggly underneath, okay, we've got the function definition, or rather we have the function prototype right here, but not the function definition yet. That's going to be found in the implementation file. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a second. But now we've got a function definition, one of the member functions or powers that the student record class can perform. All right, well, a lot of set functions are going to be returning void, so I'll pop them over here, void, void. And then inside, it's going to be very similar to beforehand. We want to set the hours. And we want to set the ID number. Okay. And again, you might be asking yourself, do I need to have these or not? Can I get by with something like that? And we'll talk about it here in a second when we talk about our implementation file. But I'll do hours and I'll do int ID. So lowercase for the inputs and then uppercase for the actual class variables. All right, well, get GPA is actually going to return that value. So it's going to return the data type for that specific private member variable. So there's going to be float as a return type for get GPA. And since I don't necessarily need to send get GPA because it's kind of a command, right, I can actually say void for all my arguments. Well, get hours is going to be the same thing. So it's going to tell us how many hours they have. And you'll notice then that there's a little red squiggly here because I'm missing some semicolons. Let me just add those in right here. add in void, and then same sort of thing with get ID. It's going to be returning an integer, and it's going to be returning the ID number, and that's also void. And then recalculate GPA. Well, this sounds like a task, and you can have return something if you want, but we're just going to put void. Okay. And effectively, it's going to perform some sort of task of updating and changing GPA after, if you recall from the instructions, recalculate the GPA based on the current semester's GPA and hours. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that later. That'll be one of the most exciting functions that we define. All right, so let's send those semicolons to define the function prototypes. And now we just need to finish off the arguments. So we're going to, based upon, again, as mentioned, the GPA on the current semester. Okay, so we'll call this float. This is current GPA. And then we're going to have, well, the hours for that semester. Float current hours. And in fact, I'll make this lowercase GPA, just so that we know that it is going to be an input and it's not related to this capitalized GPA. All right, so effectively now we've got this class, student record, okay, and we can do a few more things, but we'll just keep it like this. Essentially, we could add some other information like their address, or we could add information about their phone number. Okay, we could even have their last name and first name and some other things like that. And all of these things would come into place right here in the private variable space. And then of course we could access those using some functions, okay, to get to this information. You can also have public variables, all right, and you can also have private functions. But for an introductory sort of lecture on classes, this is kind of the first place to start so that you can kind of get a sense for what these classes can do and how they work. All right, I'm going to hit Control S. Okay, I'm going to come back to my main function right here. Okay, and now we need to spend some time talking about the CPP file. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add a new item. In this case, I'm not going to add a class, I'm going to add a CPP file. But this one has to be the name of the class. So student record.cpp. I'll hit add. Now we've got three. We've got our main function right here. We've got our student record right here. And we've got our student record.cpp file. So we have the declaration file right here. Then we've got our implementation file right here. And so we're going to go off and define these various functions. Let's just go back to our slides here for a second and see how it works. So this is found in a CPP file. That's what we have so far. We have the class name, and then we have two colons right here that separate these functions. All right, so I'm going to go and I'm going to copy out these 7 functions and copy and paste them into our student record.cpp file. Okay. Now, since each one of these needs to be defined, we need to go off and set the class name to which these functions are associated. Well, we know what it is. It's student record : set GPA. Okay, and then we need to take away this little semicolon and define it with an open and close brackets. All right. Well, we've got this little red squiggly right here, and that's because we don't have any sort of include statement where it is defined or it's been declared. Okay, so I'm going to do hash include, and I'm going to do student underscore record dot h. Okay, and there's an error. Okay, and I did this on purpose because I want you to see, okay, when we start changing these hash include statements. If you recall from the slides, okay, there was a slight required change when we declare, or rather when we include, a user-defined class. And it's with these quotations right here. Okay, it's not innate. It doesn't come with the package. It doesn't come with the IDE. And so we need to define these, or rather include them, with quotes. So I'm going to put a little quote there, a quote at the end. Okay, and you'll notice then that it disappears. Okay, so now it's properly defined up here. You can see that the student record has now been updated with a light shade of blue. Okay, almost looks gray. And then coming back here, I'm going to do the same sort of thing. I'm going to change it from the normal sort of way that we've seen all semester long to quotations. Okay. And now we're going to be including the studentrecord.h file. And now we can see then that just like the vector class and just like the IF and OF classes from the FStream include file or header file, we now can see that sure enough we have defined our own data type called student record, and we've got two instances, Billy and Erica, which are in a way declared, but they're not initialized on these two lines, lines 8 and 9. All right, so we've got our main function, we've got our header file defined, and now we need to finish up our implementation file. Okay, and so far we've got this first function right here. It's returning void. It's of the group of student record. Okay, why is this important? Well, set GPA might be a function related to some other class, and so we want to make sure that this set GPA is related to the student record class. And it takes in a float GPA, and so now we need to discuss, well, what does this function do? Well, it's supposed to set the GPA. If we're trying to set the GPA, okay, what we can do then is that if this student record has access to its private variables, and it does, okay, right here, we can just come in and say that GPA, which is accessible by student record at all times, gets assigned the value of GPA. That's it. We can return if we want, right here, or we can just leave it blank because we are returning void. However, we do need a return statement for these three right here. Okay, so that's all the function does, is that it sets the GPA with some sort of input lowercase GPA value. Okay, well, let's go through and we will add the class name to each one of these functions. So I'll just do a copy and paste for all of them. Okay, and then I need to add, well, the definition of that function. So I will come in here and I will just add a little section to define these functions. And now we're going to go through and we're going to define these functions. So set hours is going to be very similar. Okay, we're just going to have hours equal to, well, the input hours. And remember, C++ is case sensitive, so these two are going to be separate variables. ID number is the same sort of thing. We're going to set the ID number. It's an integer at this point, and that works out well, so we'll do ID. Now we need to get GPA, or we need to extract out from the member variables. Okay, and so we can do this by, well, accessing with a return statement. I can simply return what? Well, I can return the GPA. Same sort of thing, I can return the hours, and I can return the ID. Okay, this last one is most exciting because we're actually going to do something a little bit more challenging than just one-line functions. Okay. Well, what do we have? Well, we have some sort of temporary value. So, for example, we can say that, float temp hours is equal to the hours from all the previous semesters plus the current hours, okay, from the current semester. All right. Same sort of thing with the GPA then. We can have some sort of temporary GPA. Okay. And that's going to be, well, the GPA times the hours from all the previous semesters plus, okay, the current GPA times the current hours. Oops, that needs to be hours. Okay. And all of that then needs to be divided by, well, temp hours. Effectively, we're weighting, okay, all the hours times the GPA across all the previous semesters and the current semester right here by the temp hours. then we just need to go off and need to update these two values inside, well, our GPA private member variable. Which means then that GPA is going to be equal to temp GPA, and hours is going to be equal to temp hours. And we can return void. Okay? Or of course we can just comment this value out. All right, now you'll notice then that we didn't have to even have these temporary variables, because what we could have done is just copy this over right here and popped it in to this one right here. And we could comment on that one and not use it at all. And then we can do the same sort of thing for this line right here. Okay, we could copy this over. So I'm going to actually just make a copy. I'm going to take this and copy right there. Okay. And instead of temp hours, right, I need to take this value right here. Okay, and we can get by without any of these lines. And we're back to just having a very short function that updates the GPA based upon, again, the current GPA and current hours of the current semester. Okay, scaled and weighted by the hours in each one of those two. And then, of course, we update the hours. All right, so it looks like everything is well defined in this file. Let's do a Control S. Let's go back and see if we've eliminated all the green squigglies underneath these words. Sure enough, it is. And so now we've been able to define our class with a class declaration file right here, using a header file, and the class implementation file that holds all these different functions. Okay, so now we've got Billy, and we've got student record as the class type. We've got Erica and student record as a class type. And so after these two lines, Billy will become an instance of student record, and Erica will become an instance of student record. All right, well, let's start doing some things. First of all, with Billy, and I put a little dot after it's declared Billy, I can have a whole bunch of access to those functions. Okay, so I can get his GPA, I can set his GPA, I can recalculate GPA, so on and so forth. It'll be challenging, of course, to get a GPA. Okay, so I'm going to start off by just setting his GPA. I'm going to set his GPA to 0. I'm going to set Billy's hours to 0. And I'm going to give him an ID number. I'm going to give him the ID number 7683489 whatever 2. All right, so you probably recognize that Billy is a freshman. All right. So let's say after a while I want to finish off this semester, and it's been 8 months, and so I'm going to first of all update, well, Billy's GPA and see what he got for the semester. Okay, so Billy, right, we are going to recalculate his GPA. Okay, and we can see then that it takes the current GPA and the current hours. Well, he was a pretty good student, and he got a 3.8 during a relatively full 16 credit hours semester. All right, so there's Billy. We recalculated his GPA. And now what we can do is see and test out if, in fact, we have updated this. So then we can do float. I'll call it check GPA. And now I'm going to do check GPA equals, well, Billy dot get his GPA. And now I'm going to print it out. Billy's GPA right now is check GPA. All right, let's give this a try. Okay, so here's the results. Billy's GPA right now is 3.8. All right, that's easy because we know it's 3.8. Let's now have him do another semester. All right, so Billy's going to do another semester, and he has 15 credits this time. And this time he has a really rough day, or a rough semester, and he does only 3.0. And so now we're going to go off. Okay, and after we've received a new GPA for him, we'll see what his new GPA is after the next semester. All right, so Billy's GPA at the beginning of the first semester was 3.8. Now it's a 3.4. Okay, so we can do some math to kind of see if that's correct or not. Let's make it easy on us and say that he did 16 for each of these. And I'll rerun it here. We'd expect then halfway between 3.8 and 3.0. Okay, and so sure enough, Billy's GPA right now is at 3.4. So all of this is really nice. But what happens though if we already have a student that's a transfer student? Okay, so we'll take Erica now, and we will set her GPA, and she came from, I don't know, BYU, Idaho, at a 3.4. She's getting close to being done, so she's 12 credits, and her ID number is 556710998. And then she goes to school, and since this is BYU, she's unprepared for all the mountains and struggles a little bit, and finishes off with a 2.3 GPA for a semester with only 12 credit hours. And now we're going to check her GPA. Okay, and we'll also check, okay, Erica has Erica has completed how many hours? Well, we're going to have a function right here that returns get hours. So we'd expect it to be 124, and then our GPA to be somewhere less than 3.4 and just slightly below maybe 3.3-ish. All right, let's see how these students perform. So Billy's GPA, he started off at 3.8 that first semester. That was great. The second semester, 3.4. Then Erica's GPA right now is at 3.29. Okay, that's the kind of weighted average of 3.4 and 2.3. And then of course Erica has completed 124. We should probably put hours right here. And so now we've got a way to kind of extract out not just necessarily one value, but a whole bunch of values from these student records. So the student record class itself, right, is kind of a package of a whole bunch of variables. In this case, it's 3 of them, and they're different data types, and a whole bunch of functions right here. Okay, we can update, we can recalculate GPAs, we can update these type of things, and since everything is private, there's no possible way that we can extract out the hours directly. So the last line, to kind of illustrate this idea, is that Eric has completed. Well, let's see if we can just extract out the number of hours directly. Okay, we'll see then that because it was of private nature, okay, hours is indeed a variable inside the Erica instance, but we can't access it directly because hours is a private member. If I moved it to public, okay, and made that into I'll just comment this out right here, such that anyone is able to access this information, okay, coming back to the main file then, this is allowed. As a result then, as a developer, you want to be able to control the portals, the access, the windows, so on and so forth, to the instances, whether it's a student or whether it's a house or what have you, through different functions that you can update and keep the data protected by putting all of your data, all the variables inside your student record private section of your class declaration. So I was talking about it before, and now of course hours cannot be accessed directly, but it needs to be accessed through get hours right here. Okay, I've got gets. I haven't necessarily changed ID numbers. That could be another variable of set ID number. So if we want Erica to change her ID number because this one got released somehow, we're doing the same sort of thing. We can come in here and set her ID number to be some sort of, different value. And then if we ever wanted to extract that out for work or other reasons, as the ID number, well, what is it? Well, it's get ID. Let's change this to ID number is. And as a result then, of course, Billy's all the same. Erica has completed 124 hours, and then Erica's ID number is the new one, so we've updated it. We aren't able to set it, okay? So for example, we can't access it directly. We can't just say, well, set this number to be this, okay? Because again, we can't access the variables that are in the private section directly. We have to go through the variables, or rather the functions that are defined in the class implementation file to keep secure these variables.